mortgages. So this new program included what we call supply or bridge subsidy to help the co-op pay their mortgage, and that was weaned out over a period of time. But at the beginning of their mortgage, they had additional funds that they were given to pay their mortgage. And they were also given a lump sum of money, subsidy money, that they could use to help offset members' housing charges or rents. So it was based on income, and then the co-op could determine who qualified for this subsidy. The majority of housing cooperatives in Canada under these programs that were built under this program. And by the end of 1984, we had over 35,000 units in Canada built, totaling 825 co-ops. So this was by far the largest and by far the most expensive program that the government supported. But in 1983, CMHC decided to do a study, and in that study, both the public and the government began to have some doubts about whether or not this program was meeting the social mandate that the government wanted it to be meeting. And they felt that the survey concluded that only 18% of the households in nonprofit and co-op housing earned less than $5,000 a year, and therefore were in core need. And that was the idea of the co-op and nonprofit housing, was to house people in core need. So they didn't feel that at that point it was meeting their needs. The study was actually had some very positive things, and they did commend co-ops for producing good quality, well-maintained housing, and even talked about the positive social aspects, which was huge for a CMHC study. However, commentators were peppering the media at that point with accusations of high government spending, and the most damning statements of that report were actually that the program just cost the government way too much. So by 1984, nonprofit and housing co-ops funding had been cut by 44%, and by 1985, the funding had been cut completely, so the program ended. So that was the end of the second housing cooperative funding program in Canada. But we didn't stop there. So co-op members across the country urged CHF Canada to begin looking for a new program so that we could keep developing housing cooperatives. And in Europe, there had been a new program that people had been using to conquer these high interest rates that we were seeing at the time in the late 1980s. So we lobbied the government with our members and said, look, we can guarantee you, we insist that this program will be the best program. It will cost you less startup, and it will cost you less long-term. So with that, the National Housing Act was changed again, and a new program was developed. And in that program, the government insured mortgages, 30-year term mortgages, priced at the index annually at 2 points lower than the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And instead of that lump sum of subsidy that they gave in the last program to co-ops, they stated that they'd be willing to take 30% of the units and give them what they called rent sup, which we know in our other nonprofits and other social housing is now used. So they provided this rent sup to 30%. In 1988, that changed actually to 50%. But that was still more cost-effective than the previous program for governments. So just under 15,000 units of co-op housing were built across Canada under this program. And 4 cooperatives were actually built in Cape Breton under this program. But in 1990, CMHC decided that they wanted to do an extensive evaluation of all 3 of the programs. And we knew we were in trouble, because every time they did a survey or an evaluation, we were in trouble. And the report that they published actually looked at the financial cost per unit, the current demand, and how they were managed, but also looked at the social benefits, which was very positive because we felt that they were getting a well-rounded picture. And some of the results that were concluded from that survey were very, very positive. It was concluded that 30% of Canadian renters would be willing to move into a housing cooperative if given the opportunity. That's not a bad stat. And that current residents living in housing cooperative in core need ranged from 30 to 60%. Once again, an improvement, definite improvement. So we were managing to house those in core need between 30 and 60% of them anyway. And that the last program, the index-linked mortgage program, or the ILM program, was indeed the most cost-effective program for the government. So there were some really positive things that came out of that last survey. However, they decided that even though there were some positive things, they felt that there were other ways that they could actually handle this that didn't involve having a program such as the ILM program. So when budget cuts came down in 1992, at the end of the Federal Cooperative Housing Program and the ILM program, it was the result. So at that point, this was the actual last program that we've seen in place, and it was actually the end of major development for housing cooperatives in Canada. 5 minutes, okay. Time to speed up. Sorry, I didn't change my... So just to give you a little bit of an overview. A quick overview. This is actually the program overview in Nova Scotia. So there are 5 co-ops that were developed under the Section 61 program, 48 under that Section 95, that largest program, and 22 under the last program, the ILM program. And there haven't been a lot of co-ops developed specifically in Nova Scotia. I know there's been a couple of one-off housing cooperatives developed since that are non-profit rental accommodation housing cooperatives. Since the program. However, we haven't really been concentrating in Nova Scotia as a movement on new development per se. We have been, and on a program, what we have been concentrating on is trying to figure out some of the challenges and how we can turn those challenges into opportunities. So that being said, I'm going to briefly talk about challenges and hopefully have time to show you a 2-minute video. One of the largest challenges that housing co-ops have faced is their size. So 25 units is the average size, but there are a number of housing cooperatives in Nova Scotia that are 9, 10, 11, 12 units in size. We even have one that's a 3-unit co-op in HRM. And size often leads to governance and management issues. I mean, if we think about having to live in a housing co-op and be the leader in that co-op the whole time you live there and not ever getting a break, we see a lot of people burn out. We see people not being able to bring in new ideas because they get caught in the day-to-day. These co-ops also don't have the cash flow, the revenue, the financial viability to have a vacancy or to have one person not pay. There's a huge financial impact on these co-ops. So scale has definitely played a role in some of the difficulties co-ops have had. Also, when development happened in Nova Scotia, a lot of the units that were developed were rehab units. So co-op developers went out and they bought homes, and some of those homes were scattered in various neighborhoods across, sometimes blocks away from one another, and they bought them and they formed them into a co-op. So they were old, they were already 20, 30 years old, and now they're 40, 50, and 60 years old. So that's caused some real harsh realities for co-ops that are trying to do capital repairs now and finding that nothing's to code and there's a whole revamp having to happen. And there's been a lack of community. It's really difficult to form community when you're scattered that far away and you don't have a common meeting space. So that's some of the differences, I guess, from other parts of the country to Nova Scotia where, and I did mention about subsidy, that in Section 95 program with that lump sum of subsidy, the formula for that subsidy was based on interest rate. So when interest rates were high, co-ops were getting a fair amount of subsidy, but now that interest rates are low, co-ops are getting very little subsidy to actually offset their low-income members, and that's been a struggle. So that being said, I'm just going to talk a little bit about opportunity and then do my video if I have time. I'd like to say that I think that some of these challenges, if we can step back and actually have a look at some of these challenges, we can turn them into opportunities. Scale is one of the biggest issues, and I think that especially in this year of the International Year of Cooperatives, housing cooperatives need to start working together. And that may not be formal mergers, but it may mean finding a way that they can build community. It may mean that they can share services, they can find some type of economies of scale. They can, share resources with one another. And I think that we really need to start encouraging co-ops to do that. As far as those rehab units that are now 40, 50, 60 years old, maybe this is an opportunity for new development. Maybe it's an opportunity to take that land and tear down one unit and build a 4, 5, 10 unit co-op. Maybe it's time to say, we want to serve our members that are aging in place, and that would be the perfect environment to do it. So I think that it's time that we plan, that we step back, that we look, that we plan, and we decide what we want to be in the future. The end of the operating agreement means that we're really going to have to do that, and that's what this video is about, is 2020. CHF Canada has developed some resources, and the video just speaks a little bit to that. And I think, and I just want to thank you for allowing me to come and speak to you, albeit fast at the end.